Welcome everybody to Too Legit to Crit, a tabletop role-playing podcast hosted by two guys, neither of whom are still Justin. My name is John Santana, and tonight we have a very special guest host, as Justin is away gallivanting and living the high life. So I just want to give a huge, heartfelt welcome to Craig, aka Tezrak the Imp Slayer, from Threads, who is joining me tonight and is going to help me, well, not fuck this up, basically. Craig, welcome to the show, man. So, how are you doing, first and foremost? Yeah, I mean, I've been looking forward to it too. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Justin to pieces, but man, we need some time apart. But also, you are like, you know, I was checking out your itch the other day. You are like, again, another person that we have on the show that is far more talented than we will ever be.
Do things with it also. So it's been over 30 years. I started playing D&D in middle school, so in the early 90s. And I have since played a lot of games.
So, was it D&D you started? Because I think back then there wasn't as much choice as there is now, but was it D&D that you kind of started with exclusively?
Well, it was because I was in a gifted and talented program, so we were pulled out of school and put into special programs and special classes and things like that because we tested well, or who knows what. But one of my colleagues in the 7th grade basically was like, yeah, I have this thing. I have this thing called a role-playing game. I either have DC Comics superheroes or Dungeons and Dragons. And we had, as a group, decided we're going to try Dungeons and Dragons. It was the red box. It was basic D&D from sometime in the 80s. And that's what we started with, and that's what kicked it all off. So since then, I've gone on to play a ton of different games, but D&D is how I started.
Okay, and because obviously we've seen a massive evolution since, because you said about the mid-90s. That would have been, was that AD&D or was that second edition back then?
Well, as far as AD&D goes, so second edition AD&D started in '89. I didn't get my hands on it until '92 or '93, so when I started high school. Incidentally, I still have my copy of the second edition AD&D Player's Handbook that I started with. It's intact. It's very yellow, and the binding is peeling, but the cover is peeling, but it's intact. And it's still sitting on a bookshelf over there.
That's fantastic, because like Justin and I, we kind of started at the same time. We're still comparatively new to this. You know, we started about 10 years ago, give or take, now. Both of us started with Pathfinder First Edition. He went on to do the D&D thing. I never did. I was never interested in it, and that kind of still maintains to this day. But back then, so if you're kind of going back to your high school days, when you had D&D, were other systems approached, or were you guys, okay, we're playing D&D?
Other systems were approached. So the Game Master / Dungeon Master that I had in the early days, I want to say that because I played Werewolf the Apocalypse very early on.
Okay.
Werewolf the Apocalypse, Shadowrun second edition, and then by my junior year of high school, I think is when I had found the Star Wars role-playing game back when it was published by West End Games. And I grew up on Star Wars. I was introduced to A New Hope on VHS, recorded from HBO back in when I was like 5 years old.
Yeah.
You know, my parents recorded it off of HBO, and you know, that was the worst mistake they could have possibly ever made, because it basically made me into the person that I am. So yeah. Definitely I would say those four were probably what I played first. So D&D, AD&D second edition, Shadowrun second edition, Werewolf the Apocalypse, and Star Wars. Oh, and Marvel, the TSR Marvel, we played for a little while back then also. And then, but lots of D&D in college, and then stayed with D&D through my 20s and 30s, and then when I started playing other games, and especially the indie games, was again when I started when I found it was a convention in New Jersey called UberCon that took place in the early 2000s, so 2002, 2003, and started to meet people who would become luminaries in the in the indie TTRPG community. I think the first indie game I played was Sorcerer by Ron Edwards. Shabel Hiri Roach by Bully Pulpit Games were a couple that I remember off from those early days. And then Spirit of the Century, which is what was one of the more popular pre-core Fate games.
Okay.
And then by Apocalypse World in I think 2009 or 2010 is when I just like the whole like path for me and RPGs just really just blossomed and like just exploded wide open. Now, as far as my game is concerned, Shadowlight and Persona, that had started. We had made the decision to go with our own. It started as a fantasy setting for D&D. So we were with the advent of open gaming, when D&D came out in third edition, when Wizards of the Coast acquired TSR, and they published the third edition of D&D. They published it with the open gaming license, and that opened it literally and figuratively opened the doors for people to make their own supplements, their own books of magic spells, their own books of character classes, you know, the quintessential, the advanced, all of which was poorly balanced and wickedly overpowered, but nevertheless, people came out with their own settings and custom ways, you know, different, you know, D20 horror, D20 space, you know, take the system in all these different directions. And so we originally were the group that I was playing with in New Jersey. Our original plan was to publish an original fantasy setting that would be D&D compatible, and that started. And then Wizards of the Coast made the decision. So third edition was 2000, 3.5 was 2003. They made the decision to move to fourth edition in 2007, which is part of the reason why Paizo did what it did and forked off with Pathfinder. So Paizo introduced Pathfinder first edition as kind of 3.75, and then further branched away from D&D rules, going into second edition Pathfinder and now with remastered. But when Wizards announced fourth edition D&D and how drastically the rules would change from 3.5, and the fact that the license that fourth edition would be released under would be much less open than the OGL or the D20 system, my group and I looked at each other and said, well, why are we bothering to take this campaign setting that we have and release it under D&D's rules if they're going to be less open and they're going to be so different than what we have been spending the last 4 years building, character classes, feats, spells, prestige classes. That's how, and you're familiar with Pathfinder first, so you would understand the idea of prestige classes. I mean, we were integrating the rules into the setting and having a lot of, not just blatant power-ups, but this is how you engage with the setting, is by coming up with unique expressions of mechanics, basically. So, the nations of the world, the organizations, the secret societies, and having unique prestige classes and feats and things like that to go along with that. And now all of a sudden, now the rules of the game have changed. And do we convert or do we abandon for all intents and purposes? And we decided to keep the spirit and keep the setting, and keep a lot of the themes, but to go with our own set of rules. So that's where Shadowlight and Personae came from. That's what it grew out of that. We looked at each other and said, okay, what are our goal is to get this campaign setting out. Our goal is to have a functioning original rules system that can support play with it. But me having a background in all these different types of games, in Star Wars and Werewolf, and along the way, White Wolf had put out, now it's Onyx Path that has it, but the game is called Trinity Continuum under Onyx Path, but it used to be 3 separate games: Adventure, Trinity, and Aberrant. It was kind of like the way the White Wolf has World of Darkness, this alternate history, supernatural version of the Earth. That's the way that Trinity Continuum is that it's an alternate version of Earth where you have two-fisted pulp heroes, or you have superheroes, or you have psychic people in the far future, depending on which version of the game you're playing. So I said, well, I don't want to be limited to just this one setting that we were working on. I want to take these rules and I want to run space, and I want to run horror, and I want to run cyberpunk, and I want to run steampunk, or Victorian. I never played GURPS. I had the books. I loved the book. I occupied and amused myself with the GURPS books that I had, but I never played it and I never ran it. But that idea of a universal system stuck with me. So I started running alternate games in different genres and different settings using the same rules. As a matter of fact, I was in with my group one time. We said, well, we love Shadowrun as a setting, but we can't stand the rules. So we basically filed the serial numbers off of Shadowrun and used the Persona rules to play Shadowrun. So
that seems to be quite a common a common opinion, with people who, I mean, unless you are a Shadowrun fan, a lot of people just kind of go, no, you wanna stay away from the rules of Shadowrun. They are this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
But the setting itself has always been really, really warmly received.
Yes.
I've never tried it, and I nearly got a Humble Bundle a few months back, and I can't remember whether it was 4th or 5th edition, and I asked questions, and I was advised not to bother, which is,
Well, one of the cool things about second edition is that it was so the the game itself was great, and the fiction of the setting and everything was great, but they did such a great job of their supplement books being so richly immersive. So like in Shadowrun you have these types of characters called street samurai, which actually all originates, I believe the term originates from William Gibson's book Neuromancer, which is kind of it's the most popular, if not the book that put cyberpunk on the map.
yeah,
And the whole idea of a street samurai is that he's the lone wolf. He's got all the cybernetic augmentation, and he follows a code, very much like Bushido. So he's an independent operator. He takes jobs from mysterious shadowy figures, but he still follows this code, even though it's just a personal code. He doesn't, work for any kind of any corporation or any organization for long.
yeah,
So the Street Samurai catalog was, okay, we're going to take and we're going to offer, it was a book of guns and gear, basically. But every entry was like you were reading it on the Matrix, which was its name for the internet, or the World Wide Web. It had commentary from NPCs. The graphic design made it look like you were looking at a computer terminal. That was what was so great about second edition. Then when they went to third, they started getting away from that. And I mean, I haven't looked at Shadowrun since third edition, so I don't know where it stands right now. But the rules were always just very complicated.
yeah.
And also too, I've also grown kind of less fond of giant buckets of dice type games. So I guess I don't know. We were all in agreement that we loved the lore and that we loved the fiction, but we hated the rules, and we just decided to use different rules.
No, and kind of going back to Persona, because obviously it is a universal system, which, it is an uncommon place now where you've got all these different universal systems. Can you give me a brief rundown of Persona? Just like what would be the elevator pitch, as it were.
So Persona as a rules system supports Shadowlight as a meta setting, basically. Shadowlight is an omniverse. It is the sum total of all universes and multiverses, is part of the fiction. So Persona is like a meta representation of every possible character that can exist in the game. So if 5 different groups are all running Persona games, any character from any game can be picked up and put down into another group in another game and follow the same core mechanics, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I mean that I'm really interested in. And would you say where would the system fall on the crunchy narrative scale?
Somewhere in between.
Okay.
And depending on what a group's preference is, it's open and flexible enough and modular enough, at least I intend for it to be, I want it to be seen that way, to be either less crunchy or more crunchy, less narrative focused, more narrative focused than people wanted to. I've even envisioned turning it into a board game or a card game, using it as the underlying principles for a board game or a card game, just to be able to demonstrate what it's capable of and how comprehensive it is. So if there's parts of it you don't like, throw them out. If there's parts of it that you want to see, you love how this game handles it, but you love the core mechanics of Persona, so you want to see thing X handled in Persona, well then fix it, monkey with it, make it your own, and that is my ultimate objective. Basically, I want people to, as much as I love running it for people, I want people to take it, run their own games with it, and make their own games with it.
Yeah.
So not only is there an SRD, it's all released under Creative Commons, but one of my next steps is I really need to look at putting together a creator's kit, because I want to provide potential creators with as many resources as possible for them to sit down and be like, I can do cool things with this. And, that's all that matters to me.
I mean, it sounds like a phenomenal idea. It sounds something that I would definitely be interested in. And I do like the idea of being able to create a character in a cyberpunk game and then have them move to a Victorian era campaign, have a fish out of water adventure, and have the mechanics still hold up. And I think that is fantastic. So what would be your core resolution tactic for it?
So you have an X number of dice, which everything is expressed in 10-sided dice. So when I say dice, I mean D10s.
Yeah.
You have X number of D10s for a skill that you're rolling for. So when you want to accomplish something, you issue a challenge. You pick up so many 10-sided dice, you roll them, you put them in order, you rank them highest to lowest. By default, you always look at the highest die, and then it's an opposed roll. By default, everything is opposed. So you roll so many D10s, put them in order highest to lowest, look at the highest one. I, as either in Shadowlight and Persona, I refer to the GM as the chorus, in keeping with the kind of Greek tragedy.
I like that.
Motif. So you as the player, you want to do something. You issue a challenge. Me as the GM, something is going to answer that challenge. And I'm going to roll so many D10s. I'm going to put them in order highest to lowest. We're going to compare the highest die. More often than not, there's going to be a modifier to that roll, and we're going to see who wins. And if you beat me, then you win the challenge. If you don't beat me, you fail the challenge, or you succeed, you fail to answer. It's the terminology is a little interchangeable, but ultimately it's highest result wins. And depending on what the fiction is and the circumstances are, that success can look like a variety of different things. If we tie, then we look at our next highest. If we tie again, we look at our third highest, and so on until somebody runs out of dice. And if somebody runs out of dice, then they lose the challenge.
That sounds good. I mean, I like the idea of it always. Is it always an opposed roll?
Always an opposed roll by default. Yes.
Everything
is defaults. Another thing that I envision for a more expanded version is options to use it to play solo games. So I have thought about how you would handle a system that works through opposed rolls in a solo environment. But yes, by default, everything is opposed. So the player rolls, issues a challenge, or the chorus issues the challenge, and vice versa. Answers, you roll off, contested roll, see who wins, and then determine the results in the fiction based on that.
Yeah, I don't know, I just really like the idea of it always being opposed. Because, when you're dealing with other systems that I'm more familiar with, it's always DCs. You're always dealing with a number that you have to beat. Whether it's Pathfinder, you've got a DC, which is like that. Whether it's Delta Green, it's your skill percentage. So you've always got a similar target. So as a player, you've always kind of got that meta knowledge of, I've rolled well.
Right.
Whereas
unless your GM doesn't share
Yeah.
difficulties with you. But eventually, you figure out the armor class of the monster.
Yeah.
So everybody figures out, well, he rolled a 19 and he hit. He rolled a 17 and he missed. So it must be 18 must be the magic number. So,
Yeah,
so
which
yeah.
which isn't the worst thing in the world to happen, but at the same time, I think anything that kind of pulls you away from that immersion, is something that can hamper fun in the long run. So I like the idea of there always being an opposed roll, so the goalpost is shifting, as it were.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I do like that. I think that is fantastic. So when you say, because you did say earlier you don't like huge numbers of dice, is there a maximum amount of D10s?
There is a maximum, but I was never a big fan of, so like going back to Shadowrun for a second. So Shadowrun was a difficulty number and you accrued successes. So you might roll 10 six-sided dice, 10d6, and your difficulty is 5. So every 5 that you roll on a die is a success, and then you count up successes. In the West End Star Wars game, which was the D6 system, which still technically exists, because I believe it was released under an open license. And I know that people have made, there's like Mini 6 and things like that that are still out there, and people still play with the D6 system. You add. So if you have a skill of 10 dice, you roll 10 d6 and you add them together. And I got to the point where I just got tired of all that addition.
I mean, that when you're dealing with that many d6,
yeah,
it does get to the point of being cumbersome. I remember Pathfinder First Edition, especially when we kind of got to higher levels. One of the party was a ranger, and they'd taken every feat possible for archery, and it got to the point of just being absolutely ridiculous, where he would roll his damage and then we'd have to go on to the next player while he worked it out.
Right. So to give you an example of that, I started a phenomenon amongst my home group, because I went away to college in Pennsylvania, to university, in the late 90s, and fell in with a group out there away from home that played D&D. When I left university and came home back to my parents' house, I put together a group to play with at home, and had said that, all these guys, I'm sure they would have a blast playing D&D together, and invited the ones from Pennsylvania and from Delaware to come up and meet my New Jersey friends. And that became a phenomenon known as CraigCon, and as a phenomenon that has existed now for over 20 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And it's not nearly as big as it was, and it now happens in Pennsylvania rather than the guys from Pennsylvania driving to New Jersey. So now that I live in North Carolina, I fly up for it, because it's I don't want to say it's like it's about a 10-hour drive roughly for me to get to Philadelphia nowadays. But anyway, so we had people who really enjoyed min-maxing and wanting to see just how ridiculous they could get their D&D characters. So we started an event known as the Battle Royale, where we would, in tournament fashion, we would make these characters, we would have the basic D&D rules, and then, you can only use these supplements, or you could choose 2 supplements. Like we would create the rules around the rules.
Yeah.
This is how you generate your ability scores, and so on and so forth. And then once you had those guidelines, you made your character and you basically went into pit fight and mode. Our very first one lasted from 9 p.m. Started 9 p.m. Saturday night and lasted until 6 a.m. Ran through the night till 6 a.m. That was the very first battle royal. And it was ridiculous because everybody was so kitted out that that's how long it took to get a clear winner.
Yeah.
And that's what you pick these combinations of feats and spells and magic items, and you have armor classes in the triple digits, and 17 attacks, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, we tried doing something like that in our Rune Lords game.
Yeah.
I think it was just, I think we finished early and just went, oh, okay, let's just do and it just became rocket tag.
Yeah.
It's like the first person to land a hit is going to kill somebody.
Yeah.
Just because of the ridiculous amount of dice being rolled and the bonuses were so high. It's like, yeah, you just have to keep away from each other.
So going back to Persona, so is there a limit on the number of dice? Not ultimately, but the system does sort of keep it in check by imposing a current limit. So by default, everybody has 6 attributes. And those attributes serve 2 purposes. They serve as every attribute has a corresponding trait. And so the attribute is a number that acts as a modifier to a die roll, but then also acts as, especially during character creation, as, okay, you've got for example, you've got a 3 in cunning. So that means when you start play, you get to pick 3 enhancements. Enhancements is one type of trait. So one of the attributes dictates how many dice that you have, a pool of dice that you can assign to skills, but then you take the sum of your attributes and you divide them by 10, and you get a value called your potential. So your potential dictates the maximum rating in a skill that you can have, which is the maximum number of dice that you can have at any given time. Okay. So your potential can go up as your attributes go up, and when your potential goes up, then when you go from potential 1 to 2, that means that the maximum number of dice goes up. When you go from 2 to 3, the maximum number of dice goes up, and so on. So is there an absolute cap? No, at least not by default. But there is a current cap, I guess you could call it.
So when you do one of these opposed checks, when the chorus rolls in opposition, do they roll the same amount of dice, or?
No, it is. So the chorus has options for how they want to build opposition. And the way I did it in the default was to come up with 3 different types of enemies. Adversaries, basically. So it was like minor, medium, and major, and that determines how beefy they are. It was never done in Pathfinder, but in 4th edition D&D, they actually really had a kind of clever concept called minions, where if you were using a minion monster as a dungeon master in an encounter, your minions had 1 hit point.
Yeah.
They had the full strength of the monster, but they only had 1 hit point, so they were easy to knock down. So minor adversaries are the easiest to knock down in Persona. And then medium ones are a little bit tougher, but then major adversaries are literally built the same way a player character is.
Right.
So the chorus has the flexibility to say, okay, how am I going to build the opposition? And they might set, okay, everybody is potential 1, which means the maximum number of dice they can have in a skill is 3. So I'm not gonna give everybody more than 3 dice. This is another thing that's been on my mind for literally at least a year, if not longer, is wanting to give people who want to be the GM, the chorus, tools to be able to run with as little prep as they want to be able to put in. So if they want to literally do things on the fly, like I want to be able to, like, here's how you can do stuff on the fly. If you want to prep, if you want to build characters in advance and you want to come up with highly intricate, fully fleshed out, major adversaries, by all means, go for it. But it's something that I've been doing a lot of thinking about is how do you come up with it on the fly? So maybe you set a kind of difficulty level for your adversaries, and that dictates the die amount. I've also given a lot of thought to reflexive or self challenges where the opposition may not be quite so obvious, and it may be that you're challenging yourself more than you're challenging something external, like jumping, like pole vaulting is, or trying to leap tall buildings in a single bound is really more about testing your own internal capability rather than overcoming an obstacle. So in that case, a reflexive challenge might be I roll the same number of dice as that person.
Yeah,
I've thought about that.
Yeah, before you said that, that's kind of my mind kind of immediately went there. So it does seem to me that that would be the logical, the logical resolution if you were challenging yourself, as it were, trying to push your own boundaries.
Right. And sometimes, and that has definitely, and it works. I mean, I've road tested it, so I know that it definitely works. It's just that a lot of times, I mean, if you approach Persona from the standpoint of a more traditional RPG where the players are going up against enemies or monsters or whatever, they're going to be rolling against the values that those enemies or monsters have.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time, the challenges are external, and so what the chorus is rolling is going to be dependent on that external enemy or opponent. So it depends.
Yeah. No, I think it sounds fascinating. I think it definitely sounds fascinating. So, one of our shows, we invite people on to basically run us through an intro scenario in a system they either advocate for or a system that they've created themselves. Would you be interested in doing that at any point?
I was hoping that you would ask me that, as a matter of fact. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. After this, we can kind of sit down and start going over things and start arranging. But yeah, definitely, because the whole system itself sounds fascinating, and you've sold me on the opposed roles.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
No, you've definitely sold me on that. But you also do that. There are other works on your itch.io that aren't either Shadowlight or the Persona SRD. You do like system agnostic stuff as well.
Yes, I have written some fiction-y things that don't necessarily, that could be utilized in just any game that you want, not with no specific mechanics attached. It's funny that you mentioned that because I actually haven't looked at that whole side of my itch account in a little while, so I honestly don't remember what I have up there. But yeah, I have a.
Luckily for us, I've got it up here on screen.
I know that I did I remember that I had a sort of like living suit of crystal armor. And then there was a monster called the Ravenous. I want to say that maybe I put up that description up there. But those are about the only two things that I can remember right now.
Yeah. So I've got the Ravenous up. If you don't mind, are you happy for me to read the Ravenous?
Yeah.
Okay, so the Ravenous, they go by different names in different cultures, different civilizations, different species. One thread common to all accounts is their insatiable hunger for living or freshly deceased, neurologically active, biochemically dense organs, typically the brains of sentient creatures. Emerging from a place beyond space and time, a bizarre dimension in all ways thought to be perceived, they inspire abject terror on all who've stood in their hideous presence. Few are aware of their true appearance, and those who have gazed upon it have been incapacitated by such sheer, acute, primal fright by the experience that to convey such knowledge to others is nearly impossible. Feeding on mental energy, they typically resort to consuming the brains of the creatures they encounter, for few possess the level of cognitive nutrition that these beings desire. When they have come across creatures that could provide them with the level of synaptic fire they so crave, they turn them into cattle. For those intelligent enough to put up a fight, the Ravenous crush their willpower and enslave them. That is Lovecraftian.
Well, you know what it is that they're basically mind flayers. So they're mind flayers with the serial numbers filed off. So I've always been a huge fan of psionics and D&D, and I guess part of that has to do with having a being a fan of science fiction as well as fantasy. So when I first, to give you a little background on second edition AD&D, so you had your core books, and then your supplements were that they put out a dedicated book to extend each character class. So there was a complete fighter's handbook, there was a complete thief's handbook, wizards, and so on. Well, that's what I had my hands on in high school, and I didn't play first edition, so my experience with psionics was when I got my hands on the complete psionics handbook, which was an extension of D&D because psionics were not really, there was no psionicist class in the player's handbook, so this was something that was altogether new. And when I got my hands on it and how it was a different magic system, it used points instead of spell slots. You didn't prepare your spells. You had kind of templates that you could say, okay, I'm going to spend 5 points and I'm going to manifest this power. I absolutely fell in love with that. And I played in a campaign that I want to say Illithid's Mind Flayers became kind of important. And so with that group of that fellow group of players, with those guys, we kind of Mind Flayers and psionics became a running theme throughout most of the games that we played with common characters. So I had where the Ravenous and where the Crystal Guardian came from was back in 2001, again, early 2000s time period. I was given an opportunity. Through a gaming store in New York City, I met somebody who was publishing a third-party D&D supplement, in which case I think... All right, so they had published one, and it was on the shelf. It was available for sale, and it just so happens that they were local people, and they were getting ready to come up with a second supplement. And the second supplement they wanted to be item sets. So it was not just a magic weapon. It was a weapon, a suit of armor, a helmet, and they all provided individual benefits, but if you put them together as a set, they would give you even more.
Yeah.
So I had come up with a whole slew of those, and then I was running a campaign, and I didn't realize this until much, much later. I was running a campaign set in the Forgotten Realms, and one of my players was playing a dwarf scion. And he comes to me and he says, I want there to be this gauntlet that has slots in it. It's crystal. It's a psionic magic item. It's gauntlet, it's crystal, and it has slots that you can fit in psionic jargon. You have what are called dorhes. They are basically psionic wands.
Yeah.
It's like, this is what happens. So it has 6 slots, for each of the 6 psionic disciplines. And if you fit the most powerful possible dorhe, so a 9th level psionic power, if you fit all 6 in there, something really cool happens and they all unite. I didn't realize until many, many years later that basically he just wanted his own version of the Infinity Gauntlet.
Yeah.
in D&D. Did not occur to me at any point in time. So we're going along the campaign, and he's collecting these things, and he gets to the end, and I'm like, well, what's the payoff? Well, the payoff was that he discovers that it's not just the gauntlet, that the gauntlet is a piece of a suit of armor, and that the suit of armor was once this construct that was built by these psionic thralls to defend themselves from their Illithid captors.
Okay.
And the Illithids destroyed it and broke it into multiple pieces. And when those pieces were found, they were fashioned into gauntlets. They were fashioned into the head was fashioned into a helmet, and so on. So if you found all the pieces and wore them together, they would grant you even better things. And it turned out that it was actually the construct was imbued with an artificial consciousness.
Right.
So all these thrall people, these thrall creatures, had combined their talents to create artificial psionic life and then imbue that into the armor. The only problem is that when the armor was broken, the consciousness was broken too. So when you put all the pieces of the armor back on, the consciousness speaks to you, and it's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go all over the place, and we're going to hunt down anybody that did to my creators what these mind flayers did to them.
Yeah.
And it makes you have this moral quandary of, do I follow through on this zealous, like, I'm going to go on this unending quest, or I'm like, maybe you need some therapy, dude. Like, maybe you have some trauma that's unresolved that you need to work on. Like, so yeah, it was a journey, and that's where it came from. So that's why the Ravenous exists, and that's why the Crystal Guardian exists. The Vessel of the Guardian is what the name of the armor set is called. So those are the two that immediately come off the top of my head on the system agnostic side, because I have built stats in D&D for them. I've built stats for them in Persona.
Yeah.
In Fate, maybe I think in Dungeon World. So yeah, I've had those two show up in a variety of different games.
Yeah, I mean, I've just having a look at, you got the Artifact Golem as well.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
That was always a fun one. I envisioned the golem that has, like, it dials in, so it has these rings on its arms, and they're covered in runes. And when they go, the creator of the golem basically builds spells into it. And so when the golem goes to use those spells, the rings lock into place like a code to activate that particular spell, and that visual is where that comes from for me.
Oh no, that sounds amazing. And yeah, I mean, these things are really cool. And Couch in the chat, he has asked, why are you giving me more ammo for my Delta Green game?
Because that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, exactly. So when I kill Couch's character, it'll be, I will dedicate it to you.
Awesome.
And Couch is going to probably pick him up.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm talking over you. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that Couch is going to probably throw him into his Fabula game as well. So, he'll probably kill my character.
The other visual that I had in mind for the Ravenous was the Sentinels from the Matrix. That look of that, like, the creature with the multiple tentacles. Like, that's kind of what they look like that, only not physical. So they're incorporeal. They're vaguely visible. They come into your dimension from wherever they come from, and that's what they look like before they take on the image of something else, and before they start to eat your brain.
No, I definitely. I'm making notes here, Greg.
Awesome.
Yeah, my players are not going to be happy with you, but they'll put the blame on me first and foremost. Oh yeah, you got some phenomenal stuff.
I appreciate it.
No, I mean, I'm just having a look at your HAO, because obviously I was looking at Persona before I actually started looking at Shadowlight. So Persona obviously is the SRD which informs Shadowlight. And before we actually went on air, you were telling me about Persona. You were telling me about the sort of ideal behind it was so people can just grab it and make it whatever they want. And I think that's fantastic. And the SRD is available on craighatler.itch.io. Yeah, check it out, guys, because this is some fantastic work.
Thank you very much.
And I'm just having a look at the layout. It's really pretty as well.
Yeah, layout always has been kind of a hobby of mine, and I always wound up sticking with Microsoft Word or something similar, LibreOffice. But I learned layout way back in the desktop publishing, way back in high school, on a program which was purchased by Adobe ultimately. It was called Aldus PageMaker.
Okay.
So it went from being Aldus PageMaker to Adobe PageMaker to, and then they just dissolved it because they had InDesign, and so they just stopped offering the alternative.
Hmm.
And so I very briefly did. I was working in Apple's Pages program because they had they offered their own Office suite. So you had Pages, Numbers, and
Yeah.
Keynote, because what their Word, Excel, and PowerPoint was. But the cool thing about Pages is that it was not just a word processor. You could choose word processing mode or layout mode,
Yeah.
and so that really attracted me to that. But then I stopped using the Mac. The iMac that I had died, and I went back to PC, and then started using Google Docs. That became more prevalent.
Hmm.
But what I'm really loving nowadays, because I can't stand Adobe, and I've decided to excise it from my life, not only because it is ubiquitous, but also I can get on my soapbox about generative large language models and what everybody's calling AI, but that's probably could take up more time than we have. Um, so I've decided to excise Adobe from my personal life. I still have to use it for work, unfortunately, because it is the industry standard.
Yeah.
But Serif is the company that offers the Affinity products, and I have to thank the TTRPG community, because that's how I found out about them, and their line of publisher, photo, and designer are just absolutely fantastic, and they're perpetual purchases. You buy the licenses. It's not a subscription model. They were recently acquired by Canva, but I don't. I'm hopeful that what the message that they put out is that they don't plan on changing
Yeah.
the Affinity model at all. So I'm hopeful that that's going to remain the same. But Affinity is a joy to work in. It
Yes.
reminds me of the old days of working in PageMaker and Adobe Photoshop in the old, before Creative Cloud.
Yeah.
And it's slick, and it's easy to use, and it's very powerful, and that's what I'm going to be working with primarily going forward.
Yeah,
Um,
again, just like you, because of the tabletop role playing community, the Threads tabletop community, I got Affinity as well. It was a Black Friday sale.
okay.
So I went, okay, I'm getting it. And just because I was using GIMP,
Yep.
which, don't get me wrong, very powerful program, but I never quite meshed with it. So once Affinity went on sale, I bought it, and holy shit, it is fantastic.
Yeah.
It is
I mean,
absolutely
GIMP is
amazing.
great. GIMP is probably, I would say, probably one of the more. GIMP followed the model of Adobe Photoshop, but the thing is that GIMP is not a layout tool. It's not a layout
Yeah.
program. It's an image editing
Mm.
program. So I liked GIMP in the days when I was using it, because it was, when Adobe chose to switch to the more recent version of Photoshop, they changed the layout of the interface and everything. And I was like, I don't know how to use this anymore, and I don't really want to learn. So when GIMP said, we're going to make this look like Adobe Photoshop version 7, I was like, yeah, I'm going to use this from now on.
Mm.
They actually also, funnily enough, because I come in my day job, I come from the technology and education space.
Yeah.
So there was an effort made to come up with an education friendly version of GIMP, because the word GIMP is kind of has some baggage, and they called it Glimpse. So
Okay.
if you Google Glimpse, it is, I don't know how well it's supported anymore, but I know that at one point they were trying to offer it as a open source image editing tool that was education friendly, basically. So
Yeah.
but I mean, I've used a bunch of different things that are out there open source wise. LibreOffice, primarily, I would say, once the concept of open office became more and more prevalent.
Mm.
um, but now but the Affinity software is fantastic. I love it.
Okay. We kind of did touch on it. The tabletop role playing community on Threads.
Yes.
How much of a game changer has that been for you?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I have been a part of the online tabletop RPG community ever since the old days of when Google had their own social platform called Google Plus.
Yeah, I
And
was.
I am. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying I was on. I was quite prominent on Google Plus until they killed it, which is a shame.
As was I. So my experience with RPGs on the internet goes back to even before that. There used to be a web ring called rpgbloggers.com. So I started, again, as I started to meet people at conventions and the interaction with the greater online community grew. I started reading people's blogs through RPG bloggers. There wasn't a whole lot of activity on Facebook. There was some activity on Twitter. Um, and then Google rolled out Google Plus, and Google Plus was so interest focused that the TTRPG community just flocked to G Plus, and I loved it. It was such a lovely time to be a part of the TTRPG community on G Plus, because there was just a free flowing back and forth of ideas, and people would be like, yeah, I made this thing, and you would get instant feedback on day-to-day basis. And I was getting Persona out there back then too. So we're talking about 2010, 11, 12. That was a whole phase of Persona at that point too, where I was mostly playing it locally but discussing it online. This is before video conferencing. This is before really online gaming, online RPGs became a thing. Then they shuttered Google Plus, and I'm never not going to be over that.
Nah, me neither.
And so the next place was Twitter. So Twitter kind of became, and I would say in those years, I wasn't really as active online in those years from like 2018 through 2021, because I had moved from Connecticut to North Carolina in 2019. So I had a home group in Connecticut, and they were the group was great. We kind of all survived a problematic dungeon master. And stuck with each other because we loved each other so much, but we're glad when this guy decided to move on.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I left that and came down here, and then 6 months later, COVID started. So I never really had a quote unquote home group here, a local group here, and not until recently. So I've only just recently started, within the last year or so, getting out and trying to find home groups to join, home games to join. So I've mostly been bouncing around and one shots here and there, but I have fallen in with this group. They have a website, raleightabletop.org, RTR, Raleigh Tabletop Role Players, and they do run things online as well as in person. And so I played in a one shot of a Fate game called I Hunt with this group, but recently started playing this game which I have absolutely fallen in love with, called the Wild Sea, WILDSEA, one word. They have their own itch page. It is a extensive lore and fiction with the original rule system, and weird as fuck, just so super weird and creepy, but in a lovable way. And it ranges. Literally, our session yesterday was like, because you have montages, so it's very structured in the way that you handle scene making, and some types of scenes are called montages. And so my montage was, I was trying to make friends with a child that I had scared, and it bothered me. My character was bothered by the fact that I had scared her. So the idea is that it's post-apocalyptic, but it is, what has happened is that there was this overgrowth of life of it's called the verdancy. So it was this event that took place, And so the world is teeming with natural life, and it's constantly roiling and growing and being consumed and regrown all over, literally constantly. It would remind you a lot of what I initially vibed with was Nausicaa from the Studio Ghibli,
Yeah.
um, the Miyazaki. It was started as manga, but then became a movie. You know, the crazy things that come out of nature. You have the option of these bloodlines that you can choose from. One of them is a sentient fungus. One is a you are ironborn, where you're basically you're like a warforged, or a living construct.
Yeah.
But I am playing something called a Zelicrae, which is basically a sentient colony of micro spiders.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, weird but as soon as I saw it, because they have their basic rules.
Yeah.
Their basic rules are available for free. Their basic rules are 150 pages, mind you. But
just to clarify, this is the one by Felix Isaacs.
That's correct. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've posted the link in the chat for anyone who is wanting to kind of follow on at home.
The art is brilliant, is beautiful.
Yeah.
The lore is fantastic. And as soon as I saw a sentient colony of spiders, I was like, "Yep, that's my first chapter." So we had my montage, which was like, okay, it's all where I'm like, the friendly. I'm like ingratiating myself to this child, trying to ease her fears, and I'm like fixing little like knickknacks and toys for her. So all very cozy and precious and pure. And then meanwhile, there's 4 people in total. One person was absent, so the other 2 are Ironborn, which again are like basically like sentient constructs.
Yeah.
And in the course of their montages, they discover that there's become this industry in husk bodies for there's a concept in Wild Sea called whispers, which basically it's like a psychic bubble of power for all intents and purposes. But somebody has made an industry out of turning people into husks called containers that hold on to these whispers. And that's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
And it's awful and horrible, and it needs to stop.
Yeah.
So that is the range of story that we have gotten through, and the group is great, and I love them, and I'm having a blast. But
it does look phenomenal. I'm just having a look at the HIO now.
Or untangenting back to Raleigh Tabletop Role Players, that's kind of the local crowd that I've fallen in with.
Yeah.
Which I'm very fortunate for. And I'm also hoping that soon, either for RTR or for another group that I get involved with here locally, I've done a bunch of running Shadowlight and Persona online recently, but it's been a very long time since I've run it in person for anybody. So I'm really looking forward to getting back to being able to run it in person again.
No, I mean, I've always kind of favored the online just because of the practicality, especially because I was running Pathfinder for the most part. So It was easy for me I'll set up a map, I'll set up the encounters, and I click at a button, there we go. And I wasn't carrying around tokens, I wasn't carrying around maps or anything like that. But once COVID kind of lifted and I got back to being at a table and rolling dice, it was like, I'm back home. I am, I'm back doing what I love doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, so we're just getting towards like the last section of the show, which is where we kind of bring out a topic, which we go back and forth on. If you wouldn't mind helping me with that.
Okay, not at all.
But first of all, I do want to, as soon as I can find it, I do want to give out a special mention to our partners tonight. First of all, everybody check out Deals of Opportunity. It's an automatic, simple, and free way to save on the tabletop role-playing games that you want. Just add your Drive-Thru RPG and Dungeon Masters Guild wishlist and get notified anytime a title on your list goes on sale. All you have to do set it up on save. That is published by Luke from Greycastle Press, and it's a lifesaver for me.
That sounds awesome.
The amount of money that I've saved
Yeah.
is ridiculous. And our second partner this evening is 13th Moon Games. It's a family-run indie game company out of Wyoming, USA. They created the TTRPG Covenant Crucible. It's a game of modern-day witchcraft. If you can imagine the John Wick movies and The Last Witch Hunter, they got together and had a really pretty baby. This is what that baby would look like.
That sounds rad. Yeah,
if you want to check it out, check them out on 13th Moon Games on their Patreon. And also, it's our next episode of the Crit List that's coming out on Thursday. We actually had a go. It's a fucking blast. So, everybody, do check that out. And a big shout out to Stefan, who's in the chat, who is one of the creators of Covenant Crucible. So, I've got a topic. It is sent in by our very own Couch. And hopefully you can help me with this.
Okay.
So, what advice would you give to somebody who has had tabletop role-playing experience, who wanted to kind of take the leap and go from player to GM?
Okay. What advice would I give?
Yeah.
What I give to a lot of people, regardless of player, DM, GM, whatever you want to call it, is play all the games. You are going to learn more from being a player at every table that you can possibly get into. You're going to learn more about running a game in that environment than you are from reading a book.
Yes.
And even, I would say, also from watching actual play, because depending on the actual play, you have different levels of production value for all intents and purposes. And while I'm over the moon that D&D has grown in popularity, I feel like the big productions, the big actual play productions, are kind of double-edged swords, because they almost set up an unreasonable expectation for what a dungeon master is, what is needed of a dungeon master, what is needed to be a good dungeon master or a game master. I think, but it goes back to ultimately play all the games. You know, if you love it, then don't let anything stop you. You know, get together, find people who are willing to let you fuck up, willing to let you make mistakes, who are willing to let you not be the expert at the table, you know, who has not read. I remember when I first started playing, we had these like pissing contests. Well, you know, in my campaign, this is how we do things. Well, in my campaign, this is how we do things. You know, we were measuring things. And well, I've read the Dungeon Master's Guide from back to front and front to back. I know every rule by heart. Okay, good for you. Like,
yeah,
you don't. But nowadays, it's like you don't have to have it all memorized. You don't have to have it all understood. You can start small. You can have, you know, here's a village. It's being attacked by wolves, and that can be your first opening situation. Don't try and go crazy with prep. Start small. Start with a situation. Try to leave things open to allow your players to have agency and to be able to guide the story. Railroading is bad. Scripting in advance is bad. I mean, in my opinion, of course. If you have fun with those things, by all means, have your fun. They're just not for me. That would be the advice I would give. Yeah. Don't feel intimidated by it. Do it with people that you care about, that you know you can get constructive criticism from, where you have the space to be safe, to make mistakes, and to realize that you can always course correct, and you can always, as long as everybody's having fun, That's what matters. As long as everybody walks away from the end of that session and go, wow, that was amazing. Wow, I had a blast. Let's do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I agree with with everything you said. The things that I would add is that it's good when you go and you play these games and you play with multiple GMs. Everybody's got their own style. Everybody's got their own sort of fortes. Everybody's got their own weaknesses. Observe and, like you said, absorb anything you can from them. But at the same time, your players' enjoyment, your players' safety at the table is paramount. And don't pressure yourself. Don't give yourself that level of pressure of, I have to be at this level. I have to do this. And, don't set these unrealistic expectations and just play the game. Remember, you are a player too.
Exactly. And that's another thing that people forget is that the dungeon master, game master, moderator, chorus, whatever, keeper, the Wild Sea calls them fireflies, I think is what the name for the moderator is. They are players too. They are players with a different set of toys to play with. And I think that a lot of times that the DM or GM winds up short shrifted because they're expected to have all the best voices, and they're expected to be experts on the rules, and they're expected to know everything without having to page flip in a book. And that's what intimidates people from trying to run their own games.
Yeah, and I mean, the last thing I'll add to that is give yourself a break. Go easy on yourself. A lot of times, especially in the Threads community, where I'm seeing countless people going, "Oh, it's my first time GMing. It's my first time DMing. I'm petrified." It's like, why? You've got nothing to be afraid of. You're in a safe space. You've got people around you who trust you enough to kind of hand you the reins of the game. Just enjoy it. Just go out there and have fun.
Now, see, it's funny that you mentioned that, to hand the DM the reins of the game. So where I have been in a place as far as games go, is really to take those reins and distribute them more evenly amongst the table, to give to almost to the point of going GM-less. And the concept of GM-less games really interests me. I've played a few recently. One which I will shout out is called Neon Shadows by Lost Guide Games.
Yeah, we covered that a few episodes ago.
I was very fortunate, blessed. They allowed me to participate in a couple of playtests. One which was private and one which was public, I think, or one which was recorded. I can't remember. But if you go to their YouTube, I'm in their YouTube, playing a couple different characters, and that was to have that be GM-less with some leadership from Grimm and from Squidsy as the designers, was brilliant. I loved it. I had a blast. And then it's one that's, I think it's going to be kickstarting soon. It's called The Art of Power. It's about Brennan Taylor of Galileo Games. I think that he told me when I ran into him at PAX Unplugged, he said that he's going to be launching a Kickstarter for it, but it's also GM-less, uses a standard deck of playing cards. And yeah, I like the idea. I like the idea of because a GM shouldn't have that weight.
Yeah.
That they have to do all this prep, because who's to say that you're going to do all that work and then you're going to wind up getting an ROI, or return on investment from it, of the enjoyment. And I also find it very interesting that now you have professional GMs. You have this whole Start Playing website, where people are like, guess what? If I'm going to do all this work,
I need paying for it.
you're going to pay me.
Which, I mean, to be honest, I could never be a professional GM because, to be fair, my prep is nil. I mean, the most I prep, even for a Pathfinder game, is designing maps and doing tokens. Everything else, for the most part, is a brief outline and improv.
Okay.
And you know, the looser the system, the looser that improv is. So that's why I could never be a pro GM.
Right. Well, I started doing this thing recently. So we have a chain of cinemas called Alamo Draft House. So it's their dine-in cinemas, and they also have a more art house vibe to them than your standard, you know, huge chain. But they have they do events at the cinema that are not just movies. And so when the Dungeons and Dragons movie came out last year, they had a tie-in event where they offered basically they hired DMs to run a one-shot D&D adventure for people. Well, they revived it this year, and now they started doing it monthly. So they partner with this company, Dungeon in a Box, which is a subscription service where you get everything that you need to run the game inside a box once a month.
Yeah.
A one-shot adventure. And so that's what we've been doing is every month is the first Sunday of every month is running this. So simply by dint of getting the materials, reading over them, and preparing to run something that somebody else has written, I can say that I'm a professional DM.
Yeah.
But I would run games very similarly to yours, where very, very, very prep light, at least nowadays.
Yeah.
You know, when I used to run D&D in my 20s, I probably spent entirely too much time prepping, but I enjoyed it. I mean, it was fun. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's a really good answer. You've definitely provided some really good insight. But unfortunately, as much as I would like to continue, that's about all we've got time for. So okay. I just want to thank you, you know, ever so much for coming on and, you know, I won't say improving on Justin, but come on, let's call it what it is.
You can say that if you want. I'm not going to stop you.
Yeah, and I would think that Justin would be inclined to agree with me anyway. Do you want to tell people where they can find you, how they can interact with you, and how they can get their hands on the work that you do?
Yes. So I have a link tree. I will give you the link to that real quick. Do we have in Discord, do we have a channel for the corresponding, or I'll just DM it to you. That's just the easier way to do it.
Yeah, if you just send me a DM with it, and I will put it in the description of the video.
There you go. There's the link tree. Basically anywhere where I'm either Tezrak or Tezrak the Imp Slayer. So that's Facebook, Instagram, dice.camp, which is a Mastodon server.
Yep.
Threads, Blue Sky, those are the big ones, and then of course Discord.
Yeah. As for me, you can find me at Natural One at dice.camp as well. So I'm definitely going to try find you on Mastodon. I'm also behind all the social media of the channel. So you can find me at Too Legit to Create on Instagram, on Blue Sky, and more actively on Threads. I just want to send a big shout out to everybody that's joined us in the chat. Lovely seeing some of you guys. It's lovely interacting as much as we've been able to. If you like what we do and you want to kind of see more, then give us a like, a rating, subscribe, tell your friends. Whatever you do and whatever little you do is going to help us massively to grow the channel, to kind of reach out to more people. And also, I just want to thank everybody who spent time out of their busy day to come and listen to us waffle on about tabletop role-playing games. Craig, thank you ever so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And good night.